These are just the right words. So, if you would join me in prayer. The Lord be with you. Amen. Let us pray. Merciful God, ground and keep us in your compassion, and make us ministers of your reconciling love. Take from us all fear and suspicion, and help us to discern Christ in one another, that together we may proclaim by word and example that all things have been set free and made new in our Savior Jesus Christ. Give us this grace, we pray. Amen. Amen.
Good morning. Good morning. The 170th annual meeting of the Church of the Redeemer is hereby called to order. My name is Tracy Steele. I serve as the Rector's Warden. The Rector has delegated to me the duty of running this meeting. The purpose of the meeting, as set forth in the bylaws, is to elect members of the Vestry and to hear and discuss reports of parish operations and activities. Based on those in attendance at this meeting, both in Burns Hall and on Zoom, we have a quorum. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the 2021 annual meeting, which occurred on February 7th, 2021. The minutes were made available via the church website, were distributed via email in advance of this meeting, and are available in the room if you're interested in seeing them. Is there a motion to approve the 2021 annual meeting minutes? I move to approve the minutes. Melanie, is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion needed of the meeting minutes before we vote to approve them? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say nay. Any votes in abstention, please raise your hands. Motion carries. In 2021, not 2020 as stated on the agenda, contributions to the Memorials Fund were received to the glory of God and in loving memory of Charlie Blackman, Isaac Clothier IV, Robert Demius, Clayton Farnham, Molly Hill, Mary Ellen Noel, Robert McAdoo, David Strawbridge, and Bill Streamer. At this time, I turn the podium over to Al Reno to talk with you about our parish survey.
I'm sure you'll all be delighted to know that the survey is coming back. We gave it a good first try, and we're going to give you all the opportunity to respond within the next 2 weeks if you choose to. And Ken even has a paper version for those of you who are a little adverse, if you will, to online participation. But I encourage you to please take a look at it and consider completing it for us. It's part of our long-range planning process. It's our way of trying to bring you into that process by giving you a chance to present your ideas and your thoughts as we move forward into the future in a really important time. We have certainly identified our goals and been public about them, including growth and engagement, the use of the new parish house. So we have lots of things to look forward to, but we really like your ideas and input. Yes, it will take you 15 minutes or so to do it. We have gotten 76 really thoughtful responses, and we'd like to hear from more of you. So the survey will be open for the next couple of weeks, and I encourage you to complete it if you can. As Peter closed the service this morning by saying, we'd like to listen to you. Your input is valued, and so please try to help us in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. I hope every member who has not completed a survey will do so. Please look for it and make sure that your voice is counted among the others in our parish so that we can really drive our mission and our strategic plan forward with you in mind. Next, we are going to elect our nominees for Vestry. And I'm going to return the podium to Al and ask that ballots be distributed. If you are on Zoom and would like to vote no to any of the candidates, please register your vote by sending a chat through the Zoom framework to Jean-Claude Lane, and he will count your vote. Al?
Tracy, thank you. In doing this piece for Jim Buck, who is the chairman of this year's committee, I thought I would give you a little background about the process before briefly introducing the candidates for whom much information has already been distributed, and then I'll do the formal part of the nomination. So in terms of background, we had a committee of 8 people who met really almost every 2 weeks for most of the fall by Zoom. There were 4 current Vestry members: Jim, Lisa Davis, Jock Buck, Plain, and me. And then 4 at-large members, thanks to Edwin Snell, David Woods, Drew Camerata, and Mike Thompson. We had 3 sources of input for candidates. There's a very good record being kept and passed forward, if you will, of prior candidates, people who've been invited and considered it. So we had a group of them to look at. There were new recommendations from the committee, and we also opened nominations to the parish as a whole. And overall, we discussed and reviewed the interests and abilities of 18 different candidates to arrive at the slate today. This year's nominations, there are 4 candidates under consideration. Tracy graciously agreed to continue as the rector's warden, which meant then that she needed to be a candidate for another 3-year term. So therefore, we have 3 candidates who are new to the process for the first time. Tracy has already distinguished herself at the Redeemer through her commitment and leadership as rector's warden for the last year. Her leadership style could be characterized as active and involved, all the more remarkable since she founded her own small law firm in 2018. The Steeles have been active members of the Redeemer since 2008 with their 3 children. Catherine Crothers, originally from Baltimore, Dr. Crothers currently serves as director of the Brodsky Comprehensive Breast Care Center at Bryn Mawr Hospital. Her family joined the Redeemer in 2008, and Catherine's involvement with the church is centered on that of her 3 children in the church and choir. Christian Ecke. Chris and his wife, Kate, joined the Redeemer when their family moved to Wynwood in 2016. Chris has served on the education committee, teaches confirmation class, and has provided great energy and leadership to the stewardship committee. Professionally, Chris works in the area of strategic planning and operations at Vanguard. Last but not least, Kevin Leahy. Since 2008, Dr. Leahy has been on the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania. Currently, as associate professor of orthopedic ophthalmology. This time, his family joined the Redeemer and actively supported their daughters Cyril and Amanda in the youth group, acolyte Verger, and choir programs. So now let me start the formal part of the nomination process itself. In accordance with the bylaws, at least 1 month prior to the annual meeting, the nominating committee submitted a slate of nominees to the vestry for approval. The slate was approved by the vestry, was made public in church at all services and on Sundays following the nomination, and was published in the parish bulletins, including this morning. No additional nominations were made. A quorum of at least 50 members are present in person. The following individuals were selected to act as judges for the election, headed by Jock Faulkner, Melanie LeBeau, and Jennifer Bumble. The following 4 candidates are hereby nominated by the Vestry. Catherine Brothers, Kevin Leahy, Chris Janicki, and Tracy Steele. No votes shall be received except those present in person and or cast on the webcast for these nominees. The election shall be by ballot and shall be determined by the majority of the votes cast. It shall be the duty of the judges to count the votes, and I've asked Jock to report his results when the work is completed. Judges, please distribute the ballots if you haven't already done so. Thank you.
It should be noted that the nominating committee will continue their work and put forward to the Vestry 2 nominees for the diocesan convention and 1 nominee for the deanery delegates. So that's continued work of the nominating committee. Now, while the ballots are being counted, I will go ahead and give my rector's report. So I'd like to start my oral report. My written report is in the annual report. Certainly with thanks to our entire vestry, most of whom was here this morning, for their commitment and dedication over this past year. And I would like to give special thanks and appreciation to Jim Buck, Lisa Davis, and Jacques Valplaine, who are retiring from their 3-year term on the vestry. This retiring class of vestry members was in their first year on the vestry when the entire vestry approved the project to build this wonderful parish home. It was under Andrew's leadership. So interesting the amount of time that has passed, but also what we've accomplished in a relatively short period of time. Now, reflecting on this past year, I want to thank the clergy and staff for their continued leadership, dedication, and grace through another difficult year. They were persistent and provided hope and support with our efforts to return to some normalcy and our ability to gather, to pray, to celebrate together, and to reach out to others. I also want to thank each of you. Thank you for putting your trust in us, the Vestry, to be your stewards. Thank you for supporting the Redeemer through your generosity in both stewardship and outreach during this, again, difficult year, and for making this amazing parish hall something we can all use and enjoy for generations to come. Now, as a Vestry, we spent this year driving our mission and executing on the first year of our 3-year strategic plan. For me, this occurred with a feeling of gratitude for what we are as a community and what we are to each other. The mission of our church is to celebrate the love of God and Jesus Christ. As an open and welcoming Episcopal community, we worship, learn, and grow together, supporting each other and our world through generous and creative use of God's gifts. In order to preserve and continue that mission, the primary goal of our strategic plan over its 3 years is to grow in faith, membership, and impact. As a Vestry, we took measured steps to implement the goals under the plan's 3 pillars, the first of which is worship, learn, and grow together. Our second pillar is to be an open and welcoming community. And our third pillar is supporting each other and the world. With the clergy, we broke into 4 work streams. We established objectives and determined how to measure them, and then we went to work. Elizabeth Cook deserves a very special thank you for working with each of our pillar teams to create measurable goals and to formalize our planning process. Elizabeth put so many hours into getting us moving in the right direction, keeping us straight, making it visual, and allowing us to really measure what we're trying to accomplish. So thank you. Some of the good work that came out of our efforts this year are guidelines for use of the new parish house, including a use agreement and generalized pricing guidelines. The second Sunday service led by Michael Palmisano and Tori Dunkel. The survey that Albrino just mentioned to you all, and a unified arc of formation program. And that, just so you know, I mean, it really starts with our children and it continues through adulthood. And it's a wonderful program. Now, much work remains toward our strategic planning goals of growth in faith, membership, and impact. If you're interested in getting involved, please contact the clergy, any member of the Vestry, or our staff. Also, please share your ideas and have a voice in our future. We really want to hear from you. We also commenced a review of our bylaws that will continue into this year, and we formed a community awareness task force led by Jacques Gatlin that will focus on growth. We at the Church of the Redeemer are well positioned to realize growth in faith, membership, and impact. And I ask that you reflect upon and discern how you see yourself in that effort. This time, I would like to welcome Chris, our county warden, to give his report. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. I am going to walk you through our budget a little bit, but what I want to really do is just sort of give you the highlights. So I created a top 10 list here of things that you should know about the church's finances. If you want to know more detail, there's a lot more detail in the actual report that's online. And so I would refer everybody to that report, and we're happy to take questions online or offline about it. So in terms of the key takeaways, I think that everybody should know is that the church's finances are in great shape. We're really in a very comfortable space. And we ended last year with a nice sizable budget surplus. The finance committee is working really well. I would like to thank them for all their efforts on our behalf and their thoughts and time. And that part's working super well. Maybe if we could go to the next page here. I also wanted, the second point I want to hit is that it's just a sort of a control and management point, which is we take this job quite seriously. We meet regularly. There's strict accounting controls and procedures in terms of cash and disbursements. We have outside accountants. We look at our trusts and everything like that. And people are paying attention. And I think you can have comfort that your money is being well spent and that there's no opportunity for anything untoward to happen. So I want you to know that. When we look about our budget, I decided to put this up as a graph. I'm more a visual person, so I hope this helps. I wanted to sort of walk you through this a little bit and just hit a few different points here that I think are useful for you to know. Your pledge to our community is very important. Pledge revenue is more than half of what funds us. And your pledge allows us to plan the budget for next year. So when you send that pledge in, it is really allowing us to move forward and think about the life of the church and how we can finance that. Second thing I want to hit is endowment income is the next largest contributor. So these are people who have cared for us in the past and are giving us a gift now and into our future. This has also been a great driver of our revenue, and especially with the stock market being very robust and driven higher, this has been a continuing, ever-growing piece. And so while that's been a tailwind for us, I would have a little bit of more of a cautionary stance that that could become a headwind going forward. And we've been relying more and more on this endowment income to fund and sustain the life of the church. And so if that stops going up or goes down, we will have to adjust our activities accordingly. And I think the best thing that we can do is to grow ourselves into a stronger position through membership with our pillars. And that's how we can really accomplish something useful. But if we don't do that, we're going to have to think over the longer run about our staffing levels and our expenses. So I note on that. And just to sort of round this out, we own properties across the street. We get residential rent from them. We also get rental income from this building when people use it for weddings or funerals or other outside parties. I would encourage all of you to throw your events here. We threw a mini shower here. It was great. You can rent it. It's part of being a member here. You have involved in outside organizations. This is wonderful space. One of the ways that you can be a member of this community and help this community grow is by bringing people into the community and having them utilize the campus and the space. And I encourage you all to do that. And just lastly, we have some other things. Now let's go down to the expenses if you scroll down here. And I just want to walk you through how that looks, just so you have a sense of how the church operates from a financial standpoint. There's a big pie chart up there, but the takeaway I would tell you is essentially 80% of what's up there isn't really discretionary. It's basically a fixed cost operation. The staff, they need to get paid. They need to get a raise to keep up with inflation. Same for the clergy. Grounds, we have to keep our grounds. There's different levels, but you have to do it. Capital repairs, it's an old campus, things break, and they need to be fixed. Buildings, same thing. So when you look through that, that's about 80% or so, and there's really very little that we can do in the short run to change those numbers. Now the good news is we have a beautiful new building, and it's in great shape, and we have not that much deferred maintenance throughout the whole institution. Probably have a few $100,000 of stuff that will be projects that will roll over the course, the next 4 to 6 years. But things are in good shape. So, you know, when you look at these other areas, you could argue that they're not super discretionary either. We have a wonderful music program, and it takes a large place of our budget. That's something that could change, that had to change, but I think we all really enjoy and are blessed to have some of the best assets. But we do place a high value on it. It's shown. We have to do support for things as part of our mission, outreach. You could argue some of those are slightly discretionary, but it's part of what we want to be as a community, so maybe it's not discretionary. But now let's go back to the to my other points on the other page, and I'll wrap up. I know this is not super super fascinating to most folks. I want to make one point here that I think is important, and it has to do with the growth point I've been hammering home, but also has to do with our income on a pledge basis in real dollar value. So if you go back 10 years ago, the pledge income was $1,084,000. Last year, it was $1,045,000. So in 10 years, we dropped a little bit in pledge income. And if I showed you the graph, which I thought about doing, it's been essentially flat. But as we all know, Wall Street Journal yesterday, front page, inflation hits a 40-year high. So on an inflation-adjusted basis, we are basically $300,000 to the bad, let's say. And imagine what this parish could do if we had just kept up to that level. So we have some demographic challenges, I think, which is partly why we need to grow. And also, when you look at our pledging base, what you would see is that the top donors are giving more and more. But the bottom quartile of donors has been fairly stagnant. So, you know, there's definitely some, I think, warning signs there, especially as we roll that forward. So I wanted to point that out to you. Last, I just want to tell you a little bit about what the committee's working on, in addition to just being good financial controls, looking at the budget, and doing our sort of normal day-to-day work. We have a few special projects that we're taking on in 2022 that I'm excited about. One is that we've traditionally drawn the budget up year over year, and I think that makes sense because there's the next year and there's the next year, but we haven't really tried to project out what the different guide paths might be for pledge revenue and other revenue over time, i.e. if you looked out 4 years from now or 5 years from now. And so we're doing some deep work on our member base and pledging base and the demographics of that base and what all that means and how that might look going forward, so we can be more thoughtful as we think about budgeting in the longer run. I think that should serve the parish well over time. So I'm excited about that project, and I would like to compliment Dan Wesley for some really tremendous work that he's done in detailed analytics that are providing some insight into that. We also, Ellen's in the back there, and she's done some great work on the investment subcommittee. We moved money over from BNY Mellon to Vanguard, and I think for the first time ever, we're actually starting to look at our asset allocation as a whole, which is a little shocking that we never really did that in such a constructive fashion. I don't know, but the first time in a while. So, I think that's great work that's going on. And then, sort of new issues in that role. And then the last big project I know is the properties across the street where I cited the rental income. We're thinking about what role those properties might have in the life of the church, especially now that when the parish house is built, we want to keep the optionality of moving into them and using them while the parish house would be built. So it seems like a good time to sort of reassess. And as you all know, the real estate market's been extremely strong, to maybe think about whether it makes sense to monetize those and put that money somewhere else. I think that can be down. So two other last points here at the bottom. I'd like to give a shout out to Jay, our tireless administrator, who works really hard on the budget. I think there's 138 or 150 something line items in the budget, and he does a nice job of being on top of the details. He will have been with us for 15 years. And I think he's going to be a challenge to replace. And I'm not sure what the new shape of it will look like, but I think one of our challenges for this year, and an opportunity to some extent too, is to figure out a good structure going forward and to get the right people and processes behind that. So anyway, I would like to thank Jay for his time here. I appreciate it. Lastly, I would sort of double down on what Tracy said about being a process with our strategic pillars, but I would just take it one step further. The easiest and best way for us to grow is bring a friend, bring a few different friends to church. Maybe people who want to away from the flock, whomever you think would be a good addition to our community. Invite them to come to our space. That is the single best way that we can actually have growth as a community, is by all of us going out among our networks and friend committees and bringing people in. And really, growth at that level is what will be able to sustain us financially for decades to come. Thank you.
Now, Jacques, are you ready to present the results of the Vestry election?
Yes. All right, before I present the results of the Vestry election, I'm going to take a little personal liberty for a minute. And I just want to say a big thank you because I'm outgoing chair of the Stewardship Task Force. And I wanted to say two bits of thank you. One is to Chris and the Finance Committee. We work really closely together, and oftentimes we actually have good debates over subjects. And that partnership was really started by Mackie McLean and has made our church stronger by bringing the Finance Committee and the Stewardship Task Force closer together. I do want to thank our task force members. I'm not going to name them, but you know who you are. We have a small group, and then every fall we get augmented by a really important group of volunteers that do follow-up work for us. And I would just say, if you're interested in becoming involved in the stewardship effort, Chris Chesnacki is going to continue to lead that committee. So I step off the vestry. So please talk to Chris. Even if you're willing to make 3, 4, 5 phone calls every fall, it makes a big difference in the life of our church. And then lastly, thank you to all of you who've made a pledge. Our pledging income has actually increased each of the last 3 years. And that's a good trend. And as Chris said, we still have work to do. All right, so back to the regular scheduled program. I have the Vestry elections results here, and I'm happy to say that we've had, between online and in-person votes, we've had over 70 votes cast. I do want to say, because this is being recorded, that we gave multiple opportunities for those online to chat me directly to give a no vote if they chose, and otherwise we're counting their vote as a yes. And with all that as background, Chris, Catherine, Kevin, and Tracy, welcome to the Vestry. We look forward to your service. I couldn't be more excited about the 4 folks.
Thank you, Jacques, the judges of the election, as well as the parish, for electing the new members of the Vestry. Catherine, Kevin, and Chris would please stand up. Be acknowledged. There you go. Welcome. Look forward to working with you too. I now turn the meeting over to Peter to give his recognitions and his report.
Let's see if I can raise just a minute. Way of life. I'm going to take a little departure from the agenda strictly. I'm just going to give a report first and then the recognitions. And I hope that that becomes clear as to why when I get there. So I want to begin this morning by making a few comments about the word grace. Now, in my mind, that's a bit of a risky enterprise. And I'll tell you why. Years ago, when I was a member of the church choir in Westport, Connecticut, at the time of the sermon, the rector would routinely step up into the pulpit. He would take off his watch. He would set it down in front of him. And then he would say whatever came to mind for exactly 10 minutes. So one Sunday he got up and he began a short recitation. He said, grace, which then was followed by graceful, and gracious, and graciousness, and gracefulness. And I must have got caught up in the moment because I leaned over to a choir member and I said a little bit too loudly, how about Grace Kelly? And I can say that at least for the choir, not much of the rest of the sermon was heard after that. So I hope the same doesn't hold true today. And by the way, people still recall that, because every once in a while I go back to it later. Nonetheless, Bishop Gutierrez noted in his sermon last week that church leaders speak too little about grace, concentrating on other terms, other topics, and issues that seem more timely or more pressing. I don't think this is true of us at Redeemer. Our primary focus isn't what many others think of when they think of church, whether it's sinfulness, judgment, justice. Our primary focus has been and is and should be grace first, from which freedom flows. And thereby, then we are able to respond to others with love. And it is love that then can best address and remediate sin and the impulse to judgment. Just as love provides us the tools by which justice can be understood in terms of redemption. So grace is central to us. But the word grace is also vulnerable to becoming merely what Maggie Cunningham used to say in a wonderful way. It became vulnerable to being a parade word. We simply use it to register our delight and our hope without knowing clearly and firmly what grace is. So let me venture a fairly concise definition. What is grace? Well, I would say this. Grace is the ongoing speaking of God, through which something comes from out of nothing. Say that again. Grace is the ongoing speaking of God, through which something comes out of nothing. So let me briefly frame what I mean by this. There is a distinct rhythm to the speaking of God when it is graceful. It is recorded first in the book of Genesis. And God's creating this world. Before God spoke, there was only the deep murkiness of chaos teetering on the edge of non-existence. And creation began in just this way. God spoke, and something came to be. And whatever it was, it immediately had the quality of being good. From out of nothingness came the full brilliance of this cosmos. And no explanation was offered, and none was needed. The product was self-evident. We need to root ourselves more in that very first chapter. Because we tend to imagine that the rhythm Genesis describes ended just as abruptly as it began. Voila, a world. And for all intents and purposes, we have been left in it to fend for ourselves. So we often do. And grace functions that as only a kind of metaphor for the good that we experience that we didn't expect or didn't see coming. This, by the way, is what it means to be secular. It is to presume that the nature of our world no longer includes the speaking of God. And we then live within a closed system of ultimately perfectly explainable events. But faith contends something different. For faith is the trust that grace is present now, in just the same way as it was at the creation. It is no less creative, it is no less robust. It is still very much the case and very much part of our experience. That things arise as if from nowhere and from out of nothing. And they are beautiful in being both inexplicable and good. Art is graceful. Sport is graceful. It's the grace of the artist and the athlete that inspires grace. Friendship can be a grace. Forgiveness is a grace. Community can be a grace. Reconciliation can be a grace. An opening appears. Something becomes unstuck. And where we were sure that there was no viable recourse of action, options come into view. God speaks and grace is made available to us. God speaks to us. And we are addressed. And then we are given a vocation. We are called out to act in concert with and on behalf of grace. We as a church consciously set ourselves within the rhythm of the grace that God began in Genesis. And the grace that will continue until all things are brought to their fruition in God's kingdom. We are the people who speak of hope because we can speak of grace. Something can come from nothing. Something can come from nothing at any time. This is our conviction. And if we firmly ground grace in this ongoing possibility, why would we then be reluctant or embarrassed to share this with others? And invite them to the habit of celebrating this remarkable aspect of our world. As Tracy noted, we have done a lot of work to poise ourselves for growth as a parish. And growth can happen in many different ways, but it will be sustainable only insofar as we can be clear about what grace is. And can make grace the touchstone for all that we do and who we want to be as a community. I want to note Ken Garner felt very strongly that the cover of the annual report should include a picture of the parish house. Accompanied by the statement, "We did it." Complete with an exclamation point. When he gave me a draft copy, at first I felt that it was a little bit brazen. 3 rather triumphant words, setting us a very complex 10-year project that is still in the process of being finished. But I've come to think that this statement is more than just act. It's vitally important to us. It's important that we celebrate together what has been accomplished. Look, here we are. Here we are. And all of this building is inspiring and functional and inviting. And this is what people say when they come inside. The building is graceful. This is what they say when they walk the grounds. The campus is graceful. And this is what our neighbor said to us when they attended the Christmas Village event at our invitation. The whole experience was grace in play and grace shared freely. It was spectacular. And everyone knew it. Everyone knew it. And you chose financially to support a vision of what we could do. And thereby we were able to build something out of nothing. Really, take stock in that. We were able to build something out of nothing. That's a grace. And this deserves the kind of recognition that is best expressed in exuberant joy. With Joanne's help, I added the second clause to Ken's initial statement. It's directly related to the first. Now it's time for us to continue forward and realize the possibilities for our future. But we can do this only if we do not lose the sustaining sense of celebration. I can't stress this enough. People will be thrilled to be delighted to join us when we are a celebrating community. That's all we have to do. Most people don't think that way of the church. They really don't. We can be the exception, and we can be the rule in a wonderful way. I brought a few people through this building last night, and they were amazed. Collectively, they had spent decades, 60 years, working for churches, and you could see on their faces and hear in their remarks that they would never have imagined that a church building could have this feel and give them this experience. And they began to dream about what a church could be. Right then and there. It was fun to watch. It was really fun to watch. There is admittedly a need for the Redeemer to grow if it is to remain a healthy organization. Chris is very clear about that. We should all be very clear about that. And that need sets before us growth as a task, which it is. But the task will never be accomplished if the sheer joy and passion of grace is forgotten. We can do all we want to do. We don't stay sexually grounded. We'll never happen. We need to dance with 2 feet, but too often in our attempts to attract new members, we lead with the wrong. We'll have a future only if we can inspire others, and we can inspire others only if we ourselves are excited by the grace that we receive, the grace that we can offer. We did it. We did it. Take the measure of this statement and allow yourselves an enthusiasm that will not fade. We did it all together as one parish, which, as the Apostle Peter might say, is a grace into which even the angels long to look. We need to think and we need to act in this dimension. And I want to say, following in this light, I want to recognize the 3 retiring members of the Vestry. Lisa Davis, Jacques Coffey, and Jim Buck, who can't be with us. I think it's fair to say, as Tracy already noted, that when they came on board, it was already a challenging time. Construction was beginning, Vestry meetings were held in the trailers next to the church, remember those? And none of us expected the onset of 2 years of pandemic. And Zoom meetings, and all the changes and adaptations that had to be made in program and worship services. This was a time when it was critical that we pulled everything together. And by their leadership, we managed not only to do this, but to take major steps toward emerging the greatest. Really. In spirit, in skills, in insight, in foresight, in critical assessment, and in dedication to the kind of creativity that's so essential to church life, they looked toward the future on behalf of all of us. Each was an aid and a gift to me. And this parish is much stronger on account of their commitment and care. I'm deeply grateful for your service. I'll say this: you showed grace upon grace. I also want to recognize Tracy Steele, who was gracious enough, first to take up the rector's warden role for the final year of her Vestry, and second to accept a second term so that she can continue in that role. Church governance somewhat notoriously tends toward entropy. But even under the severe restrictions of COVID, Tracy streamlined meetings and reorganized the work of the vestry. She put focus and energy into the completion of the strategic plan for growth, keeping work groups on task and on point. She has been very generous in her time and conversation with me. And she has worked quietly but indefatigably to give each vestry member a voice and a task and a sense of inclusion. I am delighted that she's willing to contribute so significantly to the furtherance of all things here. I hope you are the same, and if you would once more just show your appreciation for these vestry members. As always, and I mean this as always, not like routinely, but because this is the deep truth, I want to thank the staff here. We've worked through a lot, and everyone was game to continue to rethink and retry and do whatever was necessary to make sure the church could remain present and vital and graceful across all that we've experienced. Somebody said to me the other day that if you want to know what constitutes a healthy church staff, look at the longevity of the employees. Look at the longevity of our employees here. It is one deep, abiding family, right? And it's a family for all the parishioners. It's a delight to work with them every day and every week. And I hope that you will find time, particularly around this time of annual meeting, to express your gratitude for all that they have contributed to our life together. Chris did, by the way, allude to something that hasn't really been made officially public, although the talk may be going down the line, which is that Jay Einspanier, our administrator, will be leaving the 1st of October. He's decided at this time actually to retire and venture into other things. And so I note that here also with the idea that it will be important for us to be able to celebrate his time, all that he has done here, and all that he has meant to this organization. At another time, it's a little bit more focused on his incredible achievements. So I will look forward to that, and I hope that you will as well. If you look around you, whether it's grounds, whether it's this building, whether it's that building, whether it's simply the way things work, Jay's fingerprints are everywhere there. And I've never worked with an administrator who will come anytime, any day, any hour, and do anything that is necessary. And I've got pictures to prove it because we've had some really awful bathroom situations. So, Jay, I look forward to that with you. I want to say one more thing, and then I will open the floor for questions. I already said that I was walking through the buildings last night with a couple of people who had never been on this campus. And we walked through this building first. And we went up to the church. And this was about 10 o'clock at night. We walked back out, and we were standing the walkway and we were back to the church. So the church to one side, the parish house lit beautifully, and this whole host of headstones in the graveyard, in the church. And they looked at me and they said, "Are you aware of how amazing this place is?" And my first thought was, well, I live here. I wake to it every day. It's the last thing I'm aware of when I go to bed. It's what I live and breathe. And because of that, I often can take things for granted that I shouldn't. It was such a beautiful remark, because I looked around and I thought, even in the dark, there is such power to the expression of faith that this place gives. Right? And I hope all of you feel that way. It is my deep privilege to be here. I'm aware of that. I celebrate it. I love being with you. And I love the idea of what we can do together. And I love the idea that what we do together may make a difference, not just now, and not just 10 years from now, but 40 years from now, or 60 years from now, or 100 years from now. As others look at the energy we gave to the expression of grace in a context that really, really needs it. So let's join together. Let's grow together. Let's make some new paths and do some exciting things and love every minute of it. I hope you can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to open the meeting to any questions or comments that you may have. And if you're on Zoom and you have questions, please send them by chat to Jacques, and he will post them for you. So I open it up to the floor. Any questions, comments, anything you want to talk about or more about? Just let us know. Okay. Thank you. The 170th annual meeting of the Church of the Redeemer is hereby closed. Thank you.
Yeah,